Okay, so for today's video, I came across another random YouTube channel. This guy's got just over 4,000 subscribers, and he's growing, I think, which is awesome. But his video already has almost 200,000 views, which is pretty cool. And what caught my eye is that this is about Portugal, or I guess Portuguese food. And so I figured, why not check it out together?
This is Phoi Thong. It's one of my wife's favorite desserts from Thailand. It's made from funneling egg yolk into these little strings with seeds.
Oh, this is like, yeah, this is fiuge de ovos, which is like, wires, or like egg yarn, I guess it would be translated to. Because by the end of it, it kind of looks like a ball of yarn, but it's made of eggs. Oh, I didn't know that they had this in Taiwan.
Now, when I found out about this process, I thought it was pretty cool, but specific. So I did a bit of research into the history of it, into how it came to be. And then I found out that it's not originally from Thailand, but Portugal.
Oh, Thailand, sorry.
And here came the sailors that made the maritime power that developed into modern Portugal.
Now, the weird thing is, Thailand was never a Portuguese colony. In fact, it was never a colony at all. So why is a Portuguese sweet one of Thailand's biggest snacks?
We're everywhere.
This reminded me that my family is originally from Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, we have this sweet called dan tat, or egg tart.
Or egg tarts,
And
yeah.
dan tat is really similar to a Portuguese sweet called pastel de nata. This one makes a bit more sense because
Ooh, okay. This always is a pet peeve of mine. I understand he's not Portuguese, so the pronunciation would be wrong. So you would say pastel de nata or pastel de nata, depending on the spelling of pastel or pastel. But yeah, it's not pastel de nata. It's pastel de nata. But again, he's not Portuguese, so it's cool.
Hong Kong was right next to
I'm going to guess there's going to be a lot of words that I'm going to have to reiterate.
a Portuguese colony, Macau, and Portugal had been trading with Guangdong, the region that Hong Kong was a part of, for centuries before the British ever colonized it.
Yeah.
But it's not only just these two places. Japan, the country that I'm currently living in now, also has a Portuguese-inspired sweet called Castella.
Yeah, so Castella, I believe we call it now. Well, you could say bolo do castella, which is like castella cake, but then they also have another name for it, which is now pão de ló japonais, which is like Japanese bread now. And I'm sure people see this now everywhere because there's a lot of stores or like businesses that are coming up that are Japanese run, like in Toronto and other places. There's a place now called Uncle Tetsu, and they specialize. It's basically a sponge cake, but the Japanese have made it like one of their specialties, where they've made it really, really fluffy, really, wiggly. And you'll see like Uncle Tetsu, they burn it with like a little iron on it, and they sell them in these big square box. Yeah, this is cool. I like that this guy's done the research.
But not only was Japan never a colony, they had blocked off trade from every Western nation for over 200 years. Well, they let the Dutch in, but that was it. So how is it that the Portuguese were the ones who influenced Japanese cuisine? I mean, even the Japanese word for bread, pan, is a loan word from Portuguese.
Pão, yeah.
This is kind of crazy to me, because Portuguese cuisine isn't that famous. It's not like French or Italian cuisine. And it's really even hard to find a Portuguese restaurant.
Yeah.
But despite this, Portuguese food seems to be hiding everywhere. And I mean everywhere, in literally almost every continent. So how is it that this small country's food made it to so many other cultures? And how is Portuguese cuisine actually one of the most influential in the world?
Good question. Why is Portuguese food everywhere? I wonder if he's gonna go to India, because we have an Indian dish.
Okay, let's move around the world today and briefly look at some dishes that have some influence from Portuguese.
I wouldn't say we have an Indian dish, but I think there's a dish in India that's similar to a dish, or like inspired by some of our ingredients or something like that.
Portuguese cuisine, starting with where we left off, Japan. Beyond Castella, there's actually a few Japanese dishes that are inspired by the Portuguese, but I'm gonna single out the most famous one, tempura. Before Japan had closed itself from the West, Portugal actually had a pretty significant influence here. They were the first Europeans to actually reach Japan. So they were the ones who introduced them to guns, Christianity, and Western food. Okay, by the way, quick side note, Portugal had a slave trade with Japan where they traded Japanese, Korean, and Chinese slaves to bring back to Portugal. Like, what? How am I just finding out about this now? Eventually, it was the Christianity part, not the slavery, that freaked out Japan, and that's why they closed off the country. But not before the Portuguese influenced Japan to start cooking food with eggs and flour. Tempura became a popular street food in
that
Japan,
makes sense.
and the rest is history.
I love
because
tempura.
we need to move on to the next location, Malaysia.
Okay.
Now, Malaysia has a complicated colonial history. They were colonized and occupied by a lot of different countries, but the first Europeans to do so were the Portuguese. In the 15th century, Portugal colonized Malacca, a part of now modern-day Malaysia. During this time, a bunch of Portuguese started having families with the native Malaccans, and their children became a racially mixed group of people
There's a
called the
folk dance.
Kristang. The Kristang went on to develop a curry called kari debal. Debal meaning leftovers, and because it's spicy, the English translation of it became devil's curry. But the original name has nothing to do with the
I
devil.
don't think I've ever had
In
that.
fact, it's actually a dish that's meant to be eaten right after Christmas, because the curry is meant to be made with leftovers from a Christmas meal. But speaking of curry, let's move on to India.
Oh,
A lot of people associate Indian colonization with the British, but Portugal had its own colony in India, and they actually held on to their colony longer than the British did. One of India's most popular curries, vindaloo, comes from here,
Vindaloo,
a
yeah.
state called Goa.
Goa, that's what it is. Yeah, Goa. Because vindaloo has vinegar in it, which I believe the Portuguese were responsible for bringing over. But for us, it's we say like vinho do alhos, which is like wine and garlic, but we would use vinegar with that mix. So yeah, gao. I guess that's how we pronounce that.
What makes vindaloo different from other Indian curries is that it uses the ingredient vinegar, something that
There you go.
wasn't really used by Indians at the time. The Portuguese had brought vinegar with them to marinate and preserve their meat for the long journey sailing towards India.
Yeah, because they went
And
around
it was the
a lot.
marination of vinegar that gave their meat an enhanced flavor, which the Indians have been using ever since for vindaloo curry.
That's
The preservation of meat was so important to Portugal because they were the first Europeans to really try and explore the globe, often having to sail around Africa, which is where we're going next.
Oh, peri-peri?
What
Yeah,
sorcery is
nachos.
this?
If you're a fan of Chiqui Nandos from South Africa, you can thank the Portuguese for that as well. The sauce used for peri-peri chicken in South Africa
Oh.
was first produced by the Portuguese.
Peri-peri. That's another pet peeve of mine is when people pronounce it peri-peri. I understand phonetically if you're reading it like that, but we would say peri-peri. Now, I love peri-peri sauce. Fantastic sauce. And the African version of it, like I know there's other places that do different versions of it. I do like it because they use like the bird's eye chilies, which are really quite spicy and nice. But in terms of Nando's, I'm not a fan of Nando's. I feel like their sauce is not up to par with what I've had before. And it might just be because like they've westernized it, so it's not super hot, but it's like got a bit of a kick for people. But that again, that's just me.
Who were exploring the region at the time. It's said that the Portuguese mixed chili peppers native to the area
Yeah.
with foreign ingredients like paprika, onion, and basil. They eventually left southern Africa, leaving the peri-peri sauce they developed with the
Mozambique
Africans,
and stuff
who
like that.
soon started using it to marinate their chicken. But there's a bit of a dispute on where exactly this started. The two most likely answers are either modern-day Angola or Mozambique.
Mozambique, yeah.
Moving on, this next one's probably gonna piss off a few people. Nando's isn't the only popular food in the UK inspired by Portugal. In fact, one of Britain's largest institutions is based off of Portuguese cuisine. Fish and chips.
Let's have some fish and chips.
Yeah.
Let's be really elegant.
So chips for us, French fries, we say patata frita, And that's very common to have with a lot of different foods. If you have a sandwich or something, they give you a side plate of patata fritas or French fries. But they're not like McDonald's fries or anything like that. And they're not like potato wedges. They're thicker than a fry, but they're cut. It's like flat. It's wider and flatter, or like it's hard to explain. But yeah, I'm not surprised because a lot of our cuisine is fish, right? So frying a fish, I think, would be something that the Portuguese would have done maybe way before the British. I don't know.
Okay, I'll be honest. Portugal isn't the only party involved here. Fried fish was brought to Britain by Jewish refugees in the form of the Portuguese and Spanish dish pescado frito, which looks very different to fish and chips today. Now, all this happened around the 16th century, and it's evolved to become part of Britain's identity. But Thomas Jefferson, the President of the United States, even once described the dish as fried fish in a Jewish fashion. At the same time,
that's cool.
Chips,
I like that.
or what Americans call fries, were being introduced by the French and
like
Belgians.
This would be patata
But
frita.
obviously, most people eat fish and chips without ever knowing of its Portuguese roots. Alright, let's move on to the Americas, with Brazil. This is probably the most straightforward entry in the list. Brazil was Portugal's most high-profile colony, having been colonized for over 300 years, and being the country with the most Portuguese speakers in the world. Colonial Brazil was, of course, a terrible place with slavery, exhaustion of the land's resources, and all the other bad things that come with being a colony. But again, I just want to talk about the culinary footprint left by Portugal. And the best example of that is probably feijoada, a bean and meat
okay, again, I apologize for laughing at him. I understand he's not Portuguese. This is pronounced feijoada, not feijoada. You don't break it up like that. You would say it all feijoada. And I'm sure he'll explain it, but just to go quickly over this, it's kind of like, if you want to think of it as more like a chili or like a beef or like a bean stew. I believe in Brazil they mainly use the black beans, which is kind of what you can see here. In Portugal, or like in the Azores or Açores, they would use kidney beans or white beans. And some of them they'll use like tripe, so like intestines of animals. Usually it's done with a pork, so they could do like the snout of a pork, or use the foot or the liver, stuff like that, just to enrich the flavor. It's really great, especially like if you want like a hearty stew. It's a really good dish. But yeah.
stew. It's a national dish of Brazil, using black beans, which alone is its own cultural symbol in the country.
Beans, yeah, there you go.
So it's a very Brazilian dish. But the story of its origins is contested. Some say the dish was developed by slaves in Brazil, who made the stew because all the ingredients were cheap and easy to obtain. Others say that European settlers developed it with native ingredients from Brazil. Either way,
I guess I could kind of maybe say this is kind of like what a cholent is in my mind. This is, I guess, maybe what I would assume it would kind of taste like.
Inspiration for the stew originally comes from a pork stew from ancient Rome, and was brought to Brazil via Portugal. Finally, we're gonna move on to the last stop in this video. There's more dishes we could talk about, but for the sake of time and repetition, let's end it here, in the United States. Which, to me at least, was the most surprising one.
What do we have here?
The Portuguese culinary footprint in the US begins in Hawaii.
This is Hawaii.
Our sweet rolls, I bet you. It's our sweetbread, probably. A lot of people know that that's a Portuguese thing. They think because it's titled
Hawaiian sweetbread is actually Portuguese sweetbread.
Hawaiian sweetbread, yeah.
It's a pretty universal kind of bread you can find anywhere in America, especially diners, and was something that I always thought was the product of some chemical bread factory company. But it came from Portuguese immigrants who moved from the Azores, a chain of islands that Portugal owned.
Azores, I like that too. Again, pronunciation, I'll let him pass on that.
To Hawaii, which has a very similar climate. And I think this is a perfect example of how Portuguese food is literally hiding everywhere. This bread has blended into the American identity, much like what happened in all the other countries on this list. Because unlike the French bringing baguettes to Vietnam or the Spanish bringing churros to Latin America, these foods' roots to Europe are kind of invisible. Portuguese food has somehow evolved to camouflage into very different culinary cultures. Hawaiian sweetbread is eaten everywhere, every day, and not a single time does anyone ever think it's not American. And I can say the same for tempura in Japan, fish and chips in the UK,
That one
and
surprised
peri-peri
me.
chicken in southern Africa. These dishes don't belong to Portugal anymore. They belong to the countries that eat them.
Yep.
And while Portuguese cuisine isn't one we often think about, you're likely eating it more than you've ever noticed. What I'm trying to say is that Portuguese cuisine is underrated. It should be up there with French, Italian, and Spanish, but it's often overlooked. And another detail that I wanted to add it but couldn't really find a place in the video to put it is that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to really try and explore the world. I mean, they were really the first Europeans to really
went
establish
everywhere.
sophisticated trade routes across Africa and Asia. So obviously they had first dibs to influence these places with their food. If you're from any country or place that I didn't mention and your cuisine was also influenced by Portugal, then let me know down in the comments because I would really love to just compile a list of literally every cuisine and every dish that has some connection or root to Portugal. But yeah, otherwise, if you liked the video, subscribe for more. I'm hoping to continue to keep making these videos. And I'm going to Thailand pretty soon, so hopefully I'll have some big video projects coming out from there. But yeah, otherwise, see you in the next video.
Very cool. I really enjoyed that. I think it said his name was Matthew. Great job, Matthew. I'm gonna hit the subscribe. Hopefully you come out with some other cool stuff. 10,000 likes already. Fantastic. But yeah, that was pretty educational. Pretty chill video to react to. Some things I didn't know, especially with the tempura thing. The rest I kind of already had a knowing of. But yeah, if you guys liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. I'll leave his video in the link below if you want to go give some love to him. And I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.